My dear, this is the third video on the refraction through a glass prism, and the question is we have to discuss the variation. Now when you are talking about variation, it is a graph, right? So we have to draw the graph, and the variation between what? It is a variation between angle of deviation, that is delta, with angle of incidence I. So there is a variation we have to plot between the two quantity. One is delta and other is I. Delta is angle of deviation. Just now we finished the topic on deviation, expression for deviation. There I told you that deviation depend upon angle of incidence. But I told you that we will discuss later on that how it is depending on angle of incidence. So now this is a graph which will tell us that how delta and I vary with each other. And then we have to define angle of minimum deviation with this concept, with this question, and we have to state the condition for minimum deviations. What are the three conditions I will jot down for minimum deviation? That is the conditions for minimum deviation. Student writing I is equal to E. Apart from that, there is way of writing the condition. Hence, derive an expression for refractive index. You have to derive for mu. You have to give an expression for mu of a material of a glass prism. Right? That is mu of glass, you can be say, because prism is of glass. Now, my dear, here, while giving the variation of angle of deviation with angle of incidence, let us draw this graph, my dear. So I have taken the graph, and in this graph, my dear, you can see there are the 2 points, there are the two axes of the graph. You all know this is y and this is x. On x-axis we have taken it as angle I, and on y-axis it is delta. Now you must be thinking why I have plot I on x-axis and delta on the y-axis. My dear, if you look the question, if you little bit give a logic to the question is angle of deviation vary with angle of incidence. So here, my dear, looking to this statement, and very common when you do this experiment, practically when you will observe these things, we are giving you earlier I. It means I is known to you, 35, 40, 45, these are the angle of incidence. And for that we have calculating angle of deviation. I mean to say, I is independent quantity here, and accordingly the delta is varying. So here, my dear, I should be plot on x-axis whenever you are drawing the graph. Remember this, I is acting as an independent quantity. I mean to say, I you are knowing from previously only while doing the experiment. Accordingly, your way you are taking I, you take I as 35, you take I as 40 degree, you take I as 45 degree, and you are calculating delta with the formula, my dear. Here I am using the formula. The formula was already we have done, deviation formula, that delta is equal to I plus E minus A, or we can say this as I plus I dash minus A, because E or I dash is the same, my dear, emergent, or it can be called another angle of incidence if we can take it from the next right side, and the emergent will be on the left side. So that is the way E is represented by I dash also in the diagram. So this is the formula, and by this, my dear, we are calculating delta for every various value of I. So here I and delta is plotted. Okay. Now when I draw the graph, my dear, the graph is something like this. Look at it. The graph is something like this, my dear. And what is supposed to note that, look at it, I'll tell you what is happening. Say this is the delta, the first delta, say I have taken here, say delta 1, for which let the I is here I have taken as say I1. This is I1. Now, my dear, I have taken another, say, delta here. This is delta 2, my dear, and this is your, say, I have taken another incident angle I2. So now I have taken the 2 point here, 1 point here, another point here. Now same idea, if you go on this side, look at it, what is happening. This is also a delta, and here I marked it as, suppose, as the angle, another incident angle, and this incident angle is, say, I4. Say I have marked another deviation here, and the angle of incidence again here is, say, marked as I5. Try to understand this concept, my dear. Here you can see from the graph what it reveals, what it gives us, what is an idea about it. Now you can see the graph looks like this. I'll tell you what, when you're plotting a graph, what the things you are supposed to take care of. So graph is something like this, and I have having the different value of I. Here you can see I is keep increasing, my dear. I2 is greater than I1, I4 is greater than I1, I2, I5 is greater than I1, I2, I4. I mean to say I keep on increasing. But delta is not acting like that. What is happening here, you can see earlier, you can see here from the graph, my dear, please make sure that what is observation. What I observe, that first I increases. As I increases, delta decreasing. Delta 1, delta 2 in here. For I1, I2 you can see the I increases from I1 to I2, but delta decreases from delta 1 to delta 2. But then further when afterward what is happening, when I was increasing, because I is increasing only. So when I was increasing, my dear, you can see I4, I5 more than I1, I2. So when I increases further, delta also, you can see now delta also increasing, my dear. Kya baat hai? This is the way I and delta are going on. Look at the graph carefully. Graph reveals something, my dear. Please make sure first. आराम से graph reveals something. क्या दिखा रहा है? Sir, when I was increases from I1 to I2, delta was decreases. Delta 1 to delta 2. But when I increases further, afterward, that is when I increases further, that is when it reaches to I4, I5, delta was increasing, that is it go from delta 2 to delta 1. You can see in the graph. That is first I increases, delta decreases, but afterward, I increases, delta also increase. Take care in MCQ. This is an MCQ question. That is during the variation, my dear, of I and delta, don't write I increases, delta decreases. That is the answer. The answer is first deviation decreases. The right answer is with angle of incidence increasing only, but deviation may first the deviation decreases and then it is increases. So your right answer is deviation angle decreases and then increases. This is the answer of MCQ. So please take care of this concept which I have given. Now my dear, from this what I have observed. So here I can conclude. I can conclude here, my dear. First point, angle of deviation from graph, angle of deviation delta, first increases, first angle of deviation delta first decreases with increase in angle of incidence and afterward and afterward delta increases with increase in angle of incidence I. Please, what I did, angle of deviation delta first decreases with increase in I, and afterward delta increases with increasing angle of incidence I. This is the first you can see from the graph, sir, and it will have a parabolic concepts. But now my dear, look at the second concept. Look at the second what point I can reveal, and I will show you the diagram and the table also, some experimental values also. My dear, in the diagram, can you see that delta has the same value here for two different value of angle of incidence. Here delta is having the same value. See my dear, see the graph carefully. Here the delta is same, but the angle of incidence is different. You can see from the graph, I am saying you, I1 and I5. Look at this two angle of incidence, I1 and I5. I1 and I5 are the two different angle of incidence. Please, but it have the same deviation angle. Look at it. I2 and I4 are two different angle of incidence. You can see I2 and I4 are the two different angle of incidence, but deviation angle for them is remain same. ये क्या है? What it makes you to reveal, what it makes you to conclude. So it gives us an idea from graph. From graph, for two different angle of incidence, please go through the topic carefully, because you are learning now. So you should know the idea, you should know the base, you should have a concept. So for two different angle of incidence, that is I and say I dash. What's problem? Here in my question it is I1 say is I, and I dash is say I5. Please, my graph में I1 is say I and I5 is say I dash. I have written I1, I2, I4, I5, sir. But you can take this way. And I will explain this by the table also, one column I am drawing. Look at it, you will come to know much better also. So for two different angle of incidence, I and I dash. Now here I is what? I1 and I5. I1 is taken as I, I5 is taken as I dash. Or I2 is taken as I and I4 is taken as I dash. It's wrong. So for two different angle of incidence, that is I and I dash, we have, or there is same angle of deviation. There is same angle of deviation delta. You can see. For I1 and I5, the angle of deviation is same, sir, delta 1. For I2, I4, sir, angle of deviation is same, that is delta 2. Now I have not taken 1, 2, 4, 5 here. I have taken one as I and other as I dash. And I observe there is two different angle of incidence, my dear. I1, I5, I2, I4, they are different angle of incidence, but they have the same angle of deviation. Sir, ये क्या है? Look at one practical concept, my dear. One practical concept, and I will tell you ये कैसे हो रहा है. There is what concept, what knowledge I can give about this. My dear, for example, look at this diagram. Look at this diagram. For example, my dear, this is the incident ray. This is the normal. Let here incident angle is 40 degree. Try to understand, bachcho. I am taking the example also so that you will understand better. So let the angle of incidence is 40 degree. It will be bent towards the base of the prism like this. It bent towards the base of the prism like this. Unless and until it is a condition for minimum deviation, there is a parallel refracted ray. But now it is bent towards the base of the prism. This is A, B, C I am writing. This is P, Q. Here it is R. And say here I have drawn the normal, my dear. And here it will be bent away from the normal. Say it is S. So the path is P, Q, R, S. And say here is your I dash. That is also you called E, and let that E is coming as, my dear, 53 degree. I am doing experiment. And you all know that, my dear, when I produce this incident ray and when I produce this emergent ray, here is the angle of deviation. You can see. ठीक है, आराम से एक एक पॉइंट्स पे हम बात करते हैं. So sir, if I draw the table here, I delta I dash, that is equal to E. And formula I have written because angle A is known to everybody 60 degree if it is a equilateral triangle, equilateral prism, regular prism. So that is angle A of the prism known to everybody 60 degree. Sir, I pata hai. Am I clear? So and experiment से I dash भी पता चल गया. By putting two pin here, I will see where the two pins are coming after refraction here, so that all four pins are in one line. Glass slab experiment of class 10th. Okay. So now, my dear, here say I is 40 degree. I have taken. I dash is 53 degree. So if I substitute here, I is become 40 and I dash is 53. Answer is 93 and minus A is 60. I hope it is clear. What I have given, my data. So you understood how I calculated E. Sir, दो पिन यहाँ लगाए, यहाँ से रिफ्रैक्शन देखा, जहाँ दो पिन लाइन में आया, दो पिन और लगाया, एंगल E मेजर कर दिया. तो I और E पता चल गया. फॉर्मूला में सब्स्टिट्यूट किया I डैश को और A पता है. So होता क्या है, दिस इज 40, दिस इज 53, 93 and angle A is 60. So delta is most obvious, sir, 33 degree. By formula, look at, try to understand, delta is equal to I plus E minus A. This is the formula, or E is taken as I dash. Try to understand, and the path is PQRS along PQRS. Okay. Now, my dear, if I become 53, look at the another diagram. If I become 53 here, or I can take this I here also, no issue. Principle of reversibility. Principle of reversibility is also a great concept for this all questions. So no doubt, if I go by principle of reversibility, this side, if I follow the ray along this surface AC, then this will be incident and this will be emergent. Next time, suppose I took the value of I as 53, try to understand. When I become 53, so now I have changed this. Say that I become 53 degree. Okay. My dear, by experiment, what we will observe, that this value will become 40. So I become 53, I dash become 40. Wow. So nice. substituting this same formula, you will get the delta value as 33 degree. So you can see for two different angle of incidence, my dear, the value of delta is remains same. What is actually happening? The value of I and I dash get interchanged and delta remain constant. The value of I is for 40, I dash was 53. When I was 53, angle of I dash become 40. So what is our conclusion? Sir, in the formula of delta is equal to I plus E minus A, I and E value get interchanged and hence the delta value remain same. So sir, why the name given is two different angle? You can see 40, 53 are different angle of incidence. Say here it is 40. Say here it is 53. And delta value is same for them. Please. And this is the way I try my level best to explain you. So what is happening? My two figure I have drawn, my dear. I have got this. Earlier I was taken 40 here. E was coming 53 by beam refraction experimentally. And then if I go for I as 53, I will observe E as 40. So I and E value get interchange and delta remains same. And therefore we say this for two different angle of incidence. Here in my example you can see observation number, my dear. This is 1 and this is 2. This is two different angle of incidence, my dear. And I prove this that the angle of deviation is same. Why? Why this happening, sir? Angle of incidence and angle of emergent, that is I dash and I, are interchanging their values. जब ये 40 था तो E 53 था, लेकिन जब I 53 हो गया तो I dash या E 40 हो गया. Delta वही रह गया, it remains same रह गया. So please take care of this part, my dear. And the third point, my dear, the third point, which is a very crucial point. So I am rubbing the first part here, and then I will go for the third point. Please take care of that. Now, my dear, let's go to the third point, a very crucial and very important point, where we have a minimum deviation concept revealed from the graph. And then I will explain why we are saying that this is only the case for the minimum deviation. Please, everybody give me a cooperation to understand this concept. Very important. Now, my dear, in the graph, I am taking a point here because as soon as anybody will say what is angle of minimum deviation, so here first I will tell you the definition. Angle of, I have given in my next video also I will write, no issue. But here first I will give you an idea what is angle of minimum deviation denoted by delta m. It is the value of, it is the minimum value of, you can say, it is the minimum. The important word is minimum. So you have to search in the graph where is the minimum. But minimum kiska? So it is the minimum value of angle of deviation. It is the minimum value of angle of deviation. Angle of deviation का minimum value is called angle of minimum deviation. Angle of deviation का minimum value. थोड़ा सा समझो बात को. तो सर डेरिवेशन में देखा और सर आई इन द ग्राफ, मेरे को कुछ समझ में आ रहा है कि ग्राफ में तो सर सबसे मिनिमम डेविएशन ये पॉइंट पे है. ओ गॉड, ये पॉइंट पे है. एंड हियर आई विल मार्क डेल्टा एम in the graph, that is minimum deviation angle. But my dear, look at the concept here. This minimum deviation occurred Same deviation occurred for two angles. But this minimum deviation occurred for a single value of incident angle. For one and only one value of angle of incidence. क्या समझ रहे हैं सर ये? That is here I here this is I2. Here I is equal to I dash. I is equal to I dash can be written as equal to E, because this is your I4 and this is your I5. But here, my dear, you can see at this point I is equal to I dash is equal to E. Oh God! So what this graph reveals us? What this graph reveals us? The graph says for minimum deviation, point number 3 from graph. So I will write point number 3 from graph. For one and only one, value of angle of incidence. Oh God, for one and only one value of angle of incidence, angle of deviation is minimum, and that is delta m. Please, सर ये क्या कंसेप्ट है? कैसे हुआ सर? ऐसे कैसे हो रहा है? So for one and only one, look at the graph. अभी मैं कुछ नहीं किया, मेरे को ग्राफ में ये दिख रहा है. क्या दिख रहा है ग्राफ में? What I am observing in graph? What graph reveals me? Sir, only one value of angle of incidence. And since I said angle of incidence 1, अभी तक मैं इंटरचेंज कर रहा था I dash को. अब मैं बोलता हूं I और I dash दोनों के वैल्यू सेम होंगे और उस जगह पे डेविएशन मिनिमम होगा. कैसे हुआ है सर ये? एक काम करते हैं हम लोग. लुक एट दिस वन एग्जांपल प्लीज. My dear, you all know that to explain this concept, here I am giving you concept. Suppose बेटा मैंने बोला मैं नहीं एग्री हूं, मैं that is here I can say that is for one and only one value of angle of incidence and angle of deviation is minimum. I am writing here that is hence for delta is equal to delta m, I is equal to I dash that is equal to E. This is the reverse. This is the graph reverse. कि delta become delta m, मतलब deviation become minimum deviation. Deviation become minimum deviation for one and only one value of angle of incidence. That is, I said one and only one. Earlier I and E value are interchanging, and we have a same value of deviation. But now I said I and I dash is remain same, not interchange. They remain same. ठीक है? And deviation angle will be minimum. सर ये कैसे है? देखते हैं जरा. एक कंसेप्ट है, थोड़ा हम इसके अगेंस्ट में काम करते हैं प्लीज. फॉर एग्जाम्पल बेटा कंसेप्ट, इफ डेल्टा इज डेल्टा एम व्हेन I taken greater than I dash और E, ऐसा लिया मैं नहीं मानता हूं I is equal to I dash. इसके अगेंस्ट में जा रहा हूं मैं ग्राफ को नहीं मानता. एंड आई हैव टेकन मान लो इफ डेल्टा इज डेल्टा एम व्हेन I greater than I dash और E, not I is equal to I dash, I greater than I dash. And let us draw the graph diagram. So now my dear, here this is the incident ray, this is normal, this is angle I, this will be refract, I greater than I dash, refract bend towards the normal base of the prism, This is the normal, and here it will be bent like this. And the path is called PQRS. Please try to understand. Here it is E, or it is I dash. It is E, or you can write this as I dash. No problem. Please. And the path is PQRS. You can see in my diagram. Okay? And now the incident ray is fall. The incident ray is fall on the surface AB. Okay, this is my first diagram. Look at my next diagram, my dear. Look at my next diagram to understand this concept. Now, my dear, if I taken the prism like this is A, B, C, and now assume karo ki I have asked the light to fall from here. Suppose I make the, because I change the path. Try to understand principle of reversibility कैसे असर कर रहा है. Suppose मैंने इंसिडेंट रे यहाँ लिया बेटा, पहले PQRS था, अब SRQP जाएगा. So I have taken incident ray here, and this is S according to previous figure. This is R. This is the normal I have drawn, and this is your angle I now. Earlier it was E, but now I have taken this as I. Please, because this is angle of incidence. Earlier it was E, but the path is SRQP now. It will be bent towards the normal like this. Here I have drawn the normal. It will bend towards the base of the prism. And here I will write Q. And now the light will be emerged like this. So now the path is, that is here, along path SRQP. This is along path PQRS. Understand the diagram, please. I am making the effort for you all. I am doing this effort. I am trying my level best to explain this two concept. कि देखो I is equal to E होना ही पड़ेगा. Because ग्राफ बोलता है कि एक ही वैल्यू है एंगल ऑफ इंसिडेंस का, जहां पे एंगल मिनिमम होता है, डेविएशन एंगल मिनिमम होता है, एक ही वैल्यू है. अब क्या हुआ सर यू आर सेइंग I is greater than I dash or E in my first diagram. Now my dear, along path SRQP, this is your E and this is your I. With the comparing to the first case, पहले केस के कंपेयर में सर यहाँ E है और यहां पर I था, तो मैंने उसको लिख दिया. ठीक है, तो बेटा यहां क्या हो जाएगा सर, योर आंसर वाज इंसिडेंट एंगल ज्यादा है इमर्जेंट से. तो ये केस में अलोंग दिस पाथ E will become greater than I. When I reverse the path, E will be greater than I. प्लीज. तो माय डियर, अब E ग्रेटर देन I था, पहले I ग्रेटर देन I डैश या E था, ये दो कंसेप्ट दिखा रहा है. Oh God, it is contradict to each other. Because principle of reversibility तो यही बोलता है कि it will be traces along the same path. It will retraces its same path with 180 degree. तो सर अगर वैसे जाएंगे तो पहले I ग्रेटर देन E था और ये फिगर से E ग्रेटर देन I हो गया. एंड देयरफॉर सर ये कंफर्म है कि सर डेविएशन इज मिनिमम ओनली when I and E should taken equal. नहीं तो कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन होगा, नहीं तो कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन होगा. प्रिंसिपल ऑफ रिवर्सिबिलिटी फेल्स हो जाएगा. बिकॉज अलॉन्ग वन पाथ PQRS I took I ग्रेटर देन E. मैंने अज्यूम किया कि उस समय डेल्टा इज मिनिमम. बट अगर मैंने पाथ चेंज किया, SRQP गया, तो सर E ग्रेटर देन I हो जाएगा. So sir, that's a contradiction. And therefore sir, ना I greater than E रहेगा, ना E greater than I रहेगा. I and E must equal to obey, to fulfill the principle of reversibility. I hope it is clear, because as soon as I and E become equal, now either you fall the light from here, emerging is here, or either I go from here, emerging on this side. Since I and E are equal, angle of minimum deviation will occur at one and only one angle of incidence. Please, I try my level best to explain this. So these are the two things, my dear. Here I can write figure 1 and figure 2. Figure 1 and figure 2 are contradicting each other. Hence, I must equal to E. Now I is greater than E, now E is greater than I. Otherwise, my dear, principle of reversibility fail हो जाएगा, because principle of reversibility तो यही बोलता है कि when I reverses the path, from PQRS to SRQP, no doubt, according to principle, my dear, it will retrace its same path. और अगर ऐसा होता है तो सर I ग्रेटर देन E और अब E ग्रेटर देन I होने के वजह से तो कॉन्ट्रोडिक्ट हो गया. इसलिए ये साइंस ने बहुत सही लिखा है कि एक ही एंगल अगर I और E इक्वल होता है सर, आराम से रिट्रेस करो ना सर, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, कोई कॉन्ट्रोडिक्शन नहीं. तो I ना E से बड़ा होगा, ना E इज ग्रेटर देन I. Neither I greater than E nor E greater than I. Sir, I and E both should equal. And it will obey the principle of reversibility. So my dear, बहुत से बच्चों को ये पूछा जाता है कि why I is equal to E taken for delta M. बच्चा बोलता है सर ग्राफ शो करता है, ग्राफ बोलता है, ग्राफ शो कर रहा है कि I and E are equal तो डेल्टा M मिलता है. माय डियर, इतना इजीली मत बोलो प्लीज, आप समझो. आप ऐसा बोलो कि सर अच्छा एक काम करते हैं, टेक वन थिंग सर, लेट टेक I ग्रेटर देन E एंड यू ड्रॉ पाथ PQRS. ओके, नाउ यू रिवर्स द पाथ. व्हेन यू रिवर्स द पाथ, माय डियर, द अर्लियर व्हिच वाज E now become I, you can say. So now the E will be greater than I. It will be contradict. Please. And therefore, my dear, to avoid this contradiction, because as soon as it will go along the path SRQP and the contradiction takes place. Principle of reversibility will, my dear, always say it retraces its path with 180 degree and move along the same path. And for that reason, my dear, I and E must equal. I and E must equal. And at that point where they are equal, my dear, ऐसा एक experiment करते समय when they become equal, that point, my dear, the deviation angle is minimum. So don't write only the graph says this. You have a capability of saying this. Sir, it will lead the wrong result. If you not take I is not equal to E, so either I will be greater than E or I will be less than E. That is E greater than I. But sir, when we go for this way, once I said कि I greater than E पे डेल्टा M ऑकर करता है, तो जब मैं पाथ रिवर्स करूंगा सर, तो आपका आंसर चेंज हो जाएगा. E greater than I पे डेल्टा M फॉलो करेगा, जो पॉसिबल नहीं है सर. लेकिन सर ये बात प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट नहीं होगा अगर I और E इक्वल होगा. फिर से सुनिए सर, I अगर मैंने E से ग्रेटर लिया तो मैंने एक पाथ लिया PQRS, ठीक है. लेकिन सर जैसे ही मैंने पाथ रिवर्स किया, बिकॉज प्रिंसिपल ऑफ रिवर्सिबिलिटी, मेरे को ये थोड़ी बोला गया है कि सर यू इंसिडेंट द रे फ्रॉम दिस सरफेस ओनली, आई कैन इंसिडेंट फ्रॉम दिस सरफेस आल्सो. आई हैव डन दिस. सो नाउ एज सून एज आई रिवर्सेस द in falling of incident ray, my dear, instead of this AB surface, I have taken AC surface. Then, my dear, that time E will be greater than I. I hope it is clear, my dear. And as soon as I said E will be greater than I, and for that my minimum deviation is occur. तो ये तो contradict हो गया क्योंकि मैं तो I greater than E बोल के minimum deviation ले रहा है. अब E greater than I पे minimum deviation occur हो रहा है. That is wrong because principle of reversibility should obey. Principle of reversibility should obey, and therefore, my dear, I and E must be taken equal. And hence the science in the graph makes this already a conclusion. Some of the students say, sir, by experiment. So you should know which are that experiment. How will you write? How will you prove with that experiment? So therefore, my dear, the point of the graph is there is only one and only one value of angle of incidence. Why one and only one? Because I and E, that is I and I dash. Either इधर से, either उधर से. कहीं से भी incident करवाओ sir. Minimum deviation will occur for the same value because the science said it is one and only one value. I hope it is clear for angle of incidence where angle of deviation is made. So now, my dear, I can write this. Acha, here one more thing. Student should aware and in experiment also you can do. So 2-3 points very important, sir. I and E value are interchanging and delta is the same value. I interchange होता है और delta एक same value आता है. That is for two different of angle of incidence, delta is same. And second, for one value of angle of incidence, one and only one value of angle of incidence, delta is minimum. And since I said one and only one value, तो सर चाहे मैं I यहाँ से लूँ और चाहे मैं E को लेके I को assume करूँ, principle of reversibility लेके I और E equal हो गया तो काम खत्म हो जाएगा. Principle of reversibility हो जाएगा. नहीं तो एक बार I greater than E होने लगेगा और एक बार E greater than I होने लगेगा. Please take care. एक और बात आपको यहाँ मैं बताना चाहूँगा. Don't draw your graph like this, बच्चे. This is all very important and crucial. See, when you draw the graph like this, my dear, what it show, you have a delta at one point, delta n, but I value is so many. So many I value we are getting. And I said only one value of angle of incidence. So what is important? This is wrong graph. So what is important? When you draw this graph, please draw like this. Not a flat one. It should not be flat here. Please take care. So please in the graph, because all those points will contradict your statements. Am I clear? And this is all about, my dear, your this concepts for the variations for angle of deviation. In my next video, I will upload the conditions for minimum deviation and expression for refractive index. Thank you all and Jai Hind. In the table type also you can write this in table. Write this in table also, my dear. अगर टेबल फॉर्म करने बोलते हो एक्सपेरिमेंटली सर, जैसे आपको मैंने प्रीवियस टॉपिक में टेबल्स बनाया था प्रीवियस स्टेटमेंट के लिए, तो यहाँ पे भी मैं टेबल ये बना सकता हूँ बेटा. आप देख सकते हो सर, आपने यहाँ आई ले लिया एग्जाम्पल. यू कैन सी बच्चों प्लीज, आपने आई लिया राइट. सो आई का वैल्यू बच्चा आपने ले लिया आई, यहाँ पे आपने डेल्टा ले लिया एंड दैट डेल्टा इज मिनिमम डेल्टा, और यहाँ ई ले लिया. नाउ इफ आई इज 40 से एंड ई इज ऑल्सो 40 बिकॉज आई एंड ई आर इक्वल, ऐसा एक रिफ्रैक्शन आएगा. मैंने देख लिया, दो पिन लगा दिया एंड माय डियर अगर मैंने यहाँ सब्स्टिट्यूट किया तो इट इज 40 प्लस 40 80 माइनस 60, मिनिमम डेविएशन इज से 20 डिग्री. आई होप इट इज क्लियर माय डियर. So this is the way you are getting that same value of angle of incidence. If I reverse the path, Again, angle of incidence is 40. This is along the path PQRS, for example. Along, this is for this diagram, along path PQRS. Now if I go along path, again I become 40, E become 40, again delta is 20. This is along path SRQP, and it will obey the principle of reversibility. क्योंकि आप देख रहे थे कि when I was greater than E, sir, you have taken delta is minimum, but when you reverses the path, EB is greater than I, because principle of reversibility obey करवाना था. So when I reverses the path, my dear, E is greater than I. How can I greater than E पे भी delta m आएगा और E greater than I पे भी delta m आएगा? And therefore, my dear, science said no, delta m एक ही value of incident angle पे आएगा, where I and E are equal and principle of reversibility should obey. So that's all, my dear. This is the example I have given along PQRS, along SRQP. So that's all, my dear. This is the concept. Next, these two parts I will give you in my next video. Thank you all. Jai Hind.